Oh, and I have myself a little note. Last time you were talking about, being, what kind of honest? Brutally honest.
Brutally honest.
That's my grandson.
He is, because we had him at the breakfast, and he goes to me, he says, "You're too loud." And he puts his fingers in his ear every time I would talk.
How old is he?
He'll be 7 in January.
Yeah. He's hilarious. He's a funny little guy.
He's brutally honest.
Well, that's what kids usually are.
Yeah, well, that's part of his autistic spectrum.
Yep.
So I had to write that one down. Yeah.
Did you have any questions from last week, or from the week before, chapter 3? Was there anything pressing that you looked at, or?
Oh, no.
No?
Just,
okay.
It's just like everything in the whole Bible. To me, there's too many things in between the lines. Is why I don't understand it.
Well, you're not alone with that, so.
I know. So that it does, help me in that respect.
We are in Esther 4, and this section's called "Doing the Right Thing." And this is what the author of the Bible study wrote. They said Laszlo Tokes was a pastor in, and I'm going to butcher this name, Timisoara, Romania, during the reign of Ceausescu under the communist regime. Tokes had dedicated his life to bringing about revival in the church in Romania despite opposition and danger. He risked his life to preach the gospel and stand up against the communist government. Because of his courage and integrity, he helped the people to win their freedom. God places us in situations where he wants to use us, and in those situations we are faced with the choice of doing what God calls us to do or doing what is against God. We may never face circumstances like those of Laszlo Tokes, but doing what is right includes everything from giving back extra change when a cashier makes a mistake to standing up for justice in a dangerous situation. Whether the stakes are large or small, it takes the same character qualities of courage and moral strength to choose what is right. So as a group, we're not going to cut out articles in magazines because that would probably take too long. But think of some situations where it would be hard to do the right thing. And let's talk about the consequences if you would make a different choice. So let's say, okay, if you have a friend that's going to commit adultery, what would you want to tell that person as far as the consequences of both doing the right thing and the wrong thing? Or the positives of doing the right thing versus the consequences of the wrong thing? What would you tell that friend? It's wrong, right? That would probably be the first thing that you might say. Nobody else, huh? Okay.
I hope we're not faced with that.
I hope you're not faced with that, right? Okay. But you'd probably say, well, there's going to be more than just one person hurt if they have children or your family. There's going to be a lot of people that could be hurt. Not to mention that whatever you have with that other person probably would not last or would not be meaningful. That you made a commitment to your significant other to be, their one and only. And it would be hard to try to talk to them and tell them that they were right in choosing to do adultery. Some of those situations, it does take a little bit of love and tenderness to work through. And I had another situation where a gentleman called me. I went to licensing school with him, and in his church, there was I guess it's some kind of domestic dispute or something that was going on. And he said, well, how should I counsel this person? And I said, well, first, I'm not one to give advice on that because I'm not a professional therapist. And neither are you. I said, you need to talk to your DS. If this person is in danger, then something has to be done. I said, but if, they choose not to do it and you've told them what you should do, then there's not much more you can do. It's very difficult to change people's minds once they want to do stuff. And that's kind of the point of today. Did you have any instances in your guys' lives where obeying God's call meant taking a risk or facing difficult consequences? Probably not, huh? No risk. You're not being persecuted. There's no one knocking your church down while you're worshiping in it like they're doing in China right now, right? Did anybody reject you when you decided to follow Jesus? No? Oh, okay. Well, then I guess I'm the odd guy out. I know personally myself, my parents are not thrilled that I am a pastor. They weren't when I first started. I think their tone's changing a little bit now. They were probably my biggest opponents. Not to mention some police officers from Bloomsburg, because they thought I was doing wrong things and I wasn't. I was trying to help people, and they had been told that I was helping them sell drugs, which I wasn't. I was trying to help them get off of what they were addicted to. And so it was hard because people saw who I was before. And then when I had that radical transformation and I didn't do that stuff anymore, they still saw me as who I was previously. And they didn't really understand the changes that had occurred until I would go to them and say, look, I don't do that anymore. I've changed the way I live. This is how I'm what I'm doing now. I'm trying to become a pastor. And the shock that you could see in their eyes, because a lot of them still called me horrible names for what I had done before. So, for me, there was a consequence. There was a risk because there was a lot of people who were against it. But then once they got to know what I was doing and what was going on, they were going, oh, well, that makes sense. So, you always have to think about that. And this chapter is pivotal in Esther, in that story. Her character is clearly demonstrated in her responses and choices in this chapter. So we're going to go ahead and read chapter 4, and we'll just take a couple. I'll start off, and then we'll just go around to Sally and go around until we reread the entire thing. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. When Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was in mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. Go ahead, Sally, if you'd start with 7.
And heard the whole story from him about the 20 million Haman had promised to pay the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the king's decree, dooming all Jews, and told him to show it to Esther and to tell her what was happening, and that she should go to the king to plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Esther told Hathach to go back and say to Mordecai, all the world knows that anyone, whether man or woman, who goes into the king's inner court without his summons is doomed to die unless the king holds out his golden scepter, and the king has not called for me to come to him in more than a month.
12. So they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, Relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? 15. Let me keep going.
Yeah, you might as well just finish it up.
Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him.
Okay. So what is the sequence of events? What's going on in chapter 4? Nobody, huh? This is how Bible study works. You got to talk.
Well, the Jewish people are starting to mourn because they're worried about their own fate.
Okay, they're worried about their own fate.
And Mordecai is appealing to Esther.
Okay, so Mordecai's trying to go to Esther.
And they're making a plan what they're going to do.
They're making a plan on what they're going to do. That's pretty good. I thought it was interesting that when they said that no one was allowed to go to the palace gate while they were wearing clothes of mourning. So, in a sense, Mordecai was stopping people from coming in and out of the gate of the castle or whatever it was there to show that he was in mourning. So he was taking a pretty big stance on that. Anybody else? What are some of the other sequences? So we know they're in mourning. We know that he went to Esther. What else happened?
Well, Esther's going to attempt to appeal to the king, but she really needs to wait for him to invite her in, but she's basically saying, I may have to force him to invite me in, and if I die because of it, I die.
So she's willing to take a step in the right direction, even though if she goes and he doesn't approve of her being there, she could be killed. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I got this interesting footnote here. It said that Esther risked her life by coming before the king. Her courageous act gives us a model to follow in approaching a difficult or dangerous task like Esther. We can, 1, calculate the cost. Esther realized her life was at stake. Set priorities. She believed that the safety of the Jewish race was more important than her life. Prepare. She gathered support and fasted. And determine a course of action and move ahead boldly. She didn't think too long about it, allowing the interlude to lessen her commitment to what she had to do. Well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I get the feeling that he's appealing to her to do something, and she's saying, I can't because I could be killed. And then basically when he says back to her, well, you're going to perish either way.
Yeah.
You're either going to die at the hands of the king, or if you basically take solitude in the palace and let this happen to your people, you're going to answer for that too.
Yeah.
And that's, that you're going to answer to God for it, basically.
And that you'll be killed with the rest of the Jews, but it also says, like your line will die, right? So there won't be anyone left of your family. And he also says, what if you were made queen for just such a time as this? You were put here for a reason. And if you don't help the Jewish people, help will come from another source. It will come from another place. Maybe another king will come in and rescue the Jews, but it will still come. Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty interesting.
I thought he meant God in 14. That basically that the relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place.
Well,
basically saying God will save them, but he's not going to save you if you ignore this.
Yeah, and that could be true as well, but Mordecai's also saying that it could come from another source. Not just God, but God could use another country, or God could use, another way of saving them. So that's very good, very good. So what does the response of Mordecai and the Jews to Haman's plot tell us about the Jews in Persia at that time?
Very faithful.
Okay, they're very faithful. Okay. What else? they're afraid, right?
Yeah, they're scared.
I mean, how would you feel if you're living somewhere and they said, well, guess what? All Nathans are going to be killed tomorrow. You know, I'd be probably pretty upset. I'd be like, my name's Bob. You know what I mean? So, it would be challenging, wouldn't it? What else about that Haman's plot tells us about the Jews in Persia? So they're faithful, they're scared. They still follow God's ways, right?
Hammond's dead at this point, isn't
Yeah. I believe so. No, wait, he's not. No, that wasn't Hammond that was
Two of them.
that wasn't Hammond that was killed first though. Because Hammond sent out the decree in the last chapter.
Yeah, he's not dead yet.
No.
he? Oh, he's not dead yet?
No, that was
He didn't even die.
I think that's why I'm confused. I'm kind of confused here. So,
it was the guy that
I did read ahead.
plotted to kill the king.
Oh, the two guards,
Yeah, the guards that plotted to kill the king.
Big Than and Teresh.
Yeah, I think it wasn't Hammond yet. Hammond's still in the picture because he sent the whole decree out. He's the one that made the king send the decree out. So the Jews are faithful. They're scared. They still follow God's ways, right? And they still listen to what God is saying, even though they're under the rule of the king. How does the fasting of the Jewish people in verse 3 contrast with parts of the first 3 chapters? They fasted and wept and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. So how does...
Weren't they having banquets?
Yeah, so they were having banquets and big celebrations, and now they're all mourning. So they weren't eating. They probably weren't celebrating anymore. They were all in burlap and ashes. So it changes from being joyous occasion, right, to a time of mourning and pain and
The
suffering.
Jewish people weren't attending the banquets, were they?
They could have been because they were all over the place. It was in the whole entire kingdom. Remember, they said they had a giant party, and I would imagine that it rolled out into the streets and everything else. So it doesn't say whether they were directly or not. But it went from that joyous celebration to that very distinct mourning and suffering. I mean, think about it, because any time in the Old Testament when they mourned or they wanted to repent of their sins or whatever they had done wrong, they would literally rip the clothes off of their bodies and dress in itchy burlap and then dump ashes on their heads. And so think about that. You sit there with ashes and itchy burlap on and you don't eat. Think about how that would be. I mean, so you're uncomfortable, right? You're probably be pretty embarrassed. People would be looking at you. But think about if anybody today went around throwing burlap on and dumping ashes all over themselves. I mean, it would be a little weird, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I didn't know what that meant. Sackcloth and ashes. I thought, well, what is that?
It's sackcloth is burlap. Yeah.
It's a mourning.
I didn't. That's what mine was.
Yeah, sackcloth is burlap. Or burlap-like. Have you ever worn burlap or put burlap on?
Wearing a fever, right?
Yeah, basically.
Been accused of it a few times when I was a kid.
Yeah.
My dad, what do you got a feed bag on?
Yeah. I mean, I remember having to wear one when I was a little kid for, like, the Christmas plays we did and stuff. They put it on as one of the shepherds. Oh, it was horrible. Like, your head would be terrible itchy.
If you're ever a scarecrow at Halloween. And then you had straw and burlap.
No, I never dressed up as a scarecrow. I was a little too plump for that, I guess. But it's interesting to see that it goes from that celebration to that time of mourning. So what is the progression of responses that we see in Esther?
Well, first she's curious to see what's going on.
Okay.
That's why she sends Hathach to go out and find out.
Okay.
And I think then she goes into a there's nothing I can do kind of mode.
So she kind of realizes what her fate would be, or what is she supposed to do? Like, who am I?
Yeah, what am I supposed to do? And his answer is, well, you've got to do something.
Do something. Something's better than nothing, right? And then you see acceptance of it, and then she realizes that either way she's going to probably die. And then you see her challenge or decide to take action. So it goes through all those progressions of responses, from denying it to accepting it to then challenging it and doing something about it. So what do you think Esther may have been feeling at different points in her responses?
I think she went from being curious to afraid to determined.
Okay. So if you're Esther, let me maybe rephrase this. What would you be thinking about Mordecai if all of a sudden you heard this was going on? If you heard that he had stopped everybody from going in and out of the gates, if he was dumping ashes on his head, if he was wearing burlap and like saying these things to your eunuch or your servant, what do you think she felt about that? Because I'll give you my view on it, but I want to know what you guys think about that.
Well, I think she thinks he's going crazy.
He's going crazy, right? What's this crazy uncle of mine doing? Like, what's wrong with him?
She's trying to send him, new clothes out and
like, hey, stop being nuts, go be normal again, right? We can't have this. I'm queen. What are you doing? It's kind of interesting because we've probably all had instances in our lives where our parents or people around us be like, "What? Why are you acting that way? You need to knock it off." I had a good example of it. It was kind of funny. Duncan was 3, maybe 2 or 3, and he's throwing a fit in the one grocery store in West Virginia. And I leaned over to him. I said, "Duncan, if you don't stop, we're going to go to the car." And then an older gentleman, he was in the next lane from us. He goes, "You don't have to worry about beating him here. You can beat him right here, and no one will say anything to you." I said, "Go ahead and hit him a couple times." And he instantly stopped. Duncan instantly stopped doing what he was doing. He said, "I'm sorry, and I won't do it." And so he just stopped crying and everything. And the guy said, "See, this is what you should do. You need to beat your kids." I'm going, "Okay, well, I'm not going to beat my kids, but here it was, just a guy out of wherever, just said, hey, you know what, go ahead and correct your child." But I'm pretty sure your family has been like, "Why are you acting like an idiot? What's wrong with you? Change what you're doing." I think that's what Esther would have been saying. I'm the queen. Just stop doing what you're doing. What's wrong with you? So think of a situation God called you to in which obeying meant facing great risks. Does anyone have a situation like that? You didn't have to try to help somebody or maybe come upon an accident that there could have been risks, or nobody faced anything like that?
No, we came on that accident down to 11 there a couple years ago.
Okay. So what was your first reaction to that?
Well, we were standing in a car lot looking at used cars, and a car ran an intersection and T-boned another car.
Okay.
And we went up into the intersection, and I stayed with the guy that actually was the one that hit the other car, because he was pinned with his legs under the dash and he was bleeding pretty badly. And the first responder said, "You've got to hold him still." So here I am standing in sandals with gasoline coming out from underneath the car and glass, and I'm holding him by the head to keep his head straight as I'm leaning in this broken car window. And the guy's like, "You got to hold him there until the ambulance gets here." And I'm like,
I don't even know him.
And I said to Gary, "You need to find a fire extinguisher real quick here." Because I just had visions of the gas being ignited. And it was a horrible accident. The guy in the other car died on impact, and his 2 children were with him, and they must have been packed for college because there was debris everywhere.
So what was your feelings when God called you to that situation, though?
It just had to be done.
Had to be done, right? I had to help out, right? There wasn't time to think about it as you kill the fly. There wasn't time to think about it. It just had to be done, right?
Sorry, Dad.
And you know, I had a similar situation. My grandmother and I had just dropped my boys off, and we were heading back home, and here a motorcyclist with his passenger hit a deer. And they were both in the road, like one was laying down bleeding and the other one was sitting up bleeding, and nobody would stop. And so I pulled my grandmother's car across the road behind them because it was a sharp turn coming off a hill. I didn't have time to think about it. My grandma was screaming at me. I said, just get out of the car and go stand over here. You know, we got to stop traffic. So luckily another guy coming from the other direction did the same thing that way. And so no one could come, but we had to like flag the cars down and didn't have time to think about it. We had to react. And so sometimes God calls us and we don't often think of the consequences or what the right step should be. We just react. And, you know, I think in this case, though, Esther was called about it and she had time to think about it. She had time to say, okay, well, you know, what happens if I don't do it? What happens if I do it? And sometimes we don't always get that chance. You know, we just have to try to make the right calls when God puts us in that situation. And I'm sure there's other situations that weren't life-threatening that he put you guys in that you had to make a decision on something. Right? Sally probably, you know, like, can I put up with Mike anymore, right? Because I have to be his personal nurse. Yeah, see? But it's interesting because it doesn't have to be life-threatening. It could just be in a situation where God called you to do something. And what were your reactions to do those things? Or what was your reaction when God called you to do that? So maybe, for example, for at least the Fairdale folks, what was it like when God called you guys to merge the first time? When you merged the first time? I mean, did you have any mixed feelings about that? No?
No, I think the two churches
They
grew
were-
up in the same community.
They were all pretty
We've
close.
already been
anyways.
intertwined through, you know, Little League and 4-H and
Just the community,
Grange and
yeah.
all kind of community things. And so I don't.
So it wasn't a big
bad-
deal?
no,
It was a big deal for us to leave our building.
Okay. It was a big deal to leave
It
your
was,
building.
yeah, it was a big decision for that.
Okay.
But as far as the church is getting along, that
Yeah.
wasn't.
Wasn't bad.
That wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, we could have, when we first started going to church here, we could have just as easily gone to Rush.
To Rush.
Really.
Okay.
But my dad knew Claude Bennett and kind of had it in here, I guess, so we came here.
Okay. All right. What was Mordecai's perspective of Esther's role and responsibility in the situation?
I think he thought she was in a position to do something about it.
Okay.
She could.
She was
influence
someone that
the-
could help, right?
Influence the king more.
Okay.
But then I think Esther was careful because she had a good life. She had a good thing going on there. She didn't want to mess it up for herself either.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know she'd get killed probably, but I mean, she was having a good life,
Right.
I guess.
And Mordecai's pointing out, you know, you've come to this position in your life and where you are through God's grace
Yeah.
is how you got there. So, you know, remember that.
Remember that, right? And think about that in your own life. You know, what would be your response to something like that? Has there been a big life decision that you guys have had to make that affected everything else that you would have done?
I'm sure there is.
Okay.
I mean, probably the biggest life decision I made was marrying Gary.
Okay.
You know, it changed, you know, the direction of my life and my oldest daughter's life, and you know, it just went down a whole different path.
Yeah.
So
So you can kind of see where that would change what you'd have to do. It would change your perspective. You know, even if you had a good thing going before, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't know. Should I marry this guy? Should I, have my kid around this guy? There's all those questions because I know Amanda went through that as well with Bob, and I actually dated her for about a year before she even let me meet her son, because she didn't know what was going to happen, right? So it was really interesting because I kept asking her. I said, well, when am I going to be able to meet your boy? And she said, well, I want to make sure that everything's okay and things are going to work out. And it does. It changes your perspective on how you look at things and go, okay, well, at least she cares about what goes on with her kid and what things are happening. So how do Mordecai's arguments in verses 12 through 14 persuade Esther to go to the king? We've pretty much discussed this, right? You're in this position because, God wanted you to be here for this time, for a time such as this. You might either, skip over death this time, but you're eventually going to die. But why don't you go and help our people out?
Basically saying, don't forget you're Jewish too.
Don't forget you're Jewish too, right? Remember your roots. So in this chapter, how do we see God's sovereignty and people's responses working together? Anyone other than Maureen? How do you see God's sovereignty and their responses working together? First of all, what does God's sovereignty mean? Do you know? Okay, you didn't bring your dictionary. So God's sovereignty is that he's in control of all the situations, everything that happens. He is at rule and has a plan for everything. So how does that affect and work with the people's decisions in this chapter?
They got to have faith in what they're doing, I guess.
Okay.
They've got to believe in their faith.
They got to believe in their faith? All right. They got to believe that everything that has led up to this point, with Esther being chosen as queen, with Mordecai being in the position that he was, with the king liking Esther, all of those things were part of God's plan to put Esther in a position where she could help the Jewish people. So it was all part of his sovereign plan, and you can see when their responses understood what God was doing in their life, the amount of change that it had on their decisions. So, Esther finally came to that realization that, I am here for this reason. Now what can I do about it? I can go to the king and try to plead this case. So if you look at the bigger picture of your life and what's going on, and you see God working through your life to put you where you are so that you can do certain things, you got to use those abilities and things that you have that God gave you to further his kingdom, to make disciples. Just like God had done all those things in my life, everything that I went through as a kid and as a teenager and as an addict and everything else, he had me go through all those things and had it all worked out to know where I would be needed, and so that I could be used to reach other people, so that I could relate to a lot of people. And I didn't realize that until I was probably 2.5 or 3 years into my faith journey. I didn't understand why I had all those things happen to me. And then I realized, oh, holy cow, this was God making me ready to be able to help other people. Now, I didn't understand at the time when I was trying to become a pastor, because there kept being roadblocks that were put in my way, things that didn't happen, paperwork that was missing, etc., etc. But it was God's way of slowing me down enough so that I could follow by faith and then understand what he had me doing. So I wasn't just rushing into it. He was preparing me another extra step to be ready to take on whatever I would have to face. So that's how you can kind of look at it this way, is you can see God's plan unfolding through the decisions that the people were making. That his plan was to help save whatever remnant didn't go back to Israel, to help them, have a decent life where they were. I think that's pretty awesome. I mean, it's, in my book, it sent someone there that could possibly stop them from being slaughtered, right? So what character qualities does Esther show throughout this passage?
Strength.
Okay, strength.
Compassion, I guess.
Okay, compassion. What else? Only strength and compassion. Those are the only two qualities that Esther shows throughout this chapter.
Well, she's brave, too.
Okay, she's brave.
Must be intelligent, too.
Intelligent. Why is she intelligent?
Well, she come up with plans to what to do, how to approach the king.
Okay. She knew how the system worked. Understood that she wasn't allowed to go to the king for so many days. Any others? I think you guys have a pretty good list of strength, compassion, brave, intelligent. I would probably also add in there a little bit rebellious, right? Because she had to do stuff that was against the norm. She had to try to do something that would possibly endanger her life. So she was a little bit of a rebel, wasn't she? Even though I think she was just being coerced by Mordecai because she didn't want him to go full-on crazy at the city gates.
I think her bravery shows in it. And of course, if you've read on ahead at all.
Yeah.
Like even the first paragraph of her, you realize that she's getting very brave, and she's saying, okay, I'm going to do this. No matter what happens, I'm going to do this. But then when you go into the next chapter, you see that it takes her 3 days of kind of hanging around, probably looking real nice, to actually get the plan rolling. So she's very, she's very very compassionate about what she's doing, but she's also very cautious.
Very cautious. Okay. Good.
But I don't want to get into the next chapter.
Nope, you're okay.
I read the whole thing. I'm just going to see what happens.
So think of a present context in which you think God may have placed you to do his will. Does anyone have a context where God placed you in a certain place to do his will? Nobody.
Well, I think he placed us in this church so we could do things for the betterment of the church and for all of us.
For the community, okay. All right.
I think we're always under God's will. It's just a matter of whether you recognize it at the time.
Whether you recognize it, okay.
you
True.
know.
Sometimes go away.
You try to shoo them away, right?
I think you always know what you're supposed to be doing. Sometimes you've got to sit and pray about it and listen.
Okay.
About
It's not always easy.
Yeah.
So
Less work. If you
that brings us, it's less work if you don't want to listen to them, huh? Well,
Sometimes.
That's the easy way out, right? So what risks do you face in doing the right thing in these situations? If we're here to do God's work in this church, what risks do we face?
Angering people.
Okay, we could anger people. In today's world, that probably wouldn't be very hard.
And I don't know, do we see that much in this area? I mean, it's not like we're living in the city where there's different, everything, you know.
Right.
Ethnic backgrounds and.
So we don't have a lot of different religions and things up here. There, you know, people are pretty well the same throughout.
I don't think there's too many cuckoo people here.
There's not too many cuckoo people here.
I do feel that out here in the country we lead an entirely different life, and probably I know we're not as aware of the problems
Right.
in other places.
Yep.
Like just you know, to me it's hard to believe somebody wants to blow up a synagogue. Where was it? Out in Colorado, they caught somebody. And why is he doing it? What's the purpose? The harm?
What's the motivation for it?
Why? It's just too hard to comprehend.
Yep.
That there can be people like that.
Absolutely. You know, we could in the future we could face persecution. I keep thinking about the poor churches and the poor Christians in China. I mean, their government's doing everything they can right now to stop them from worshiping. They're burning their Bibles. They're knocking their churches down while they're in them. I mean, you name it. The government's trying to do everything they can to stop them, because if people have faith in religion, they don't rely on the government. And being involved in Christianity shows a person's worth. And that's something the government doesn't want in China, because then they understand that there's more to life than having to follow what the government wants you to do. And, you know, it's interesting that we don't face a lot of those risks. But in some cities, even in the U.S., you know, if you say the wrong thing, and if you are, you know, trying to help people, you literally could get attacked by it. I mean, look at the Antifa people, or whatever they call them, Antifa or whatever they are. Yeah, just veterans and stuff that are wearing hats and walking down the streets, they're getting beat up. I mean, just for something they believe in. You know, we don't see that a whole lot out here in the country. We just don't have that. There is some animosity, but it's not like you would see in a big city, right? What are some of the risks that you might face? Was there anything that you could think of, if you did the right thing, that you would face another risk? You could probably be talked about in small towns. I know that's a big one. There's a lot of rumors that get spread around. Because I grew up in small towns, and it was kind of funny, because people knew what I was doing before I even knew what I was doing. You know, and they'd be like, "Oh, did you hear what he was doing?" And I'm like, I wasn't even out of my house. Okay, inform me, let me know, right? So I can be aware of what I'm doing that I really wasn't. So what character qualities, though, must you exhibit in order to do the right thing? What does it take to do the right thing? Say, stand up for the gospel of Jesus.
Courage.
Okay, courage. Or talk to somebody about the gospel of Jesus.
Well, I think the desire and motivation to do it.
The desire and motivation, that's a good one. Absolutely. Desire, motivation, courage. What else? You have to have knowledge, right? You got to know what you're talking about.
Believe in what you're saying.
Believe in what you're saying. Okay. And I think we exhibit, you know, we'd have to exhibit the same kind of qualities that Esther had, right? We'd have to be brave. We'd have to have strength. We'd have to have compassion. We'd have to be intelligent. We'd have to be cautious. Because, you know, we do want to tell people about Jesus Christ and about God and what they can do for them in their lives, but we also don't want to sound like we're going to, you know, beat them up with our Bibles or be mean to them. We want them to understand what God has done for them or for us, what they can do for them, right? We want to show them why we're living the way we're living. And that has to be part of our experience as Christians is we have to be willing to show others why we chose Christianity. And I don't know if everyone in the church could do that. If they could say to someone, this is why I'm a Christian. And that's a tough question to ask yourself. Why am I a Christian? Why am I following in this? And I know a lot of the answers is because it's the right thing to do. Okay, but why? There is an alternative. You don't have to follow. And it's just something you did because your parents did? Is it something you truly believe in? And that's one of the things that you really have to dig deep into your soul and into your own faith and ask. Am I willing to go that extra mile and give my life for the gospel of Christ? I know we don't have to, at least not yet here in this country. At some point in time when the end times come, you will have to either stand for your faith or you'll be killed. So you're going to have that decision. I mean, it's going to be that crazy during the end times, but that's something you need to think about. Am I willing to go to the cross for Christ? Think about all the stuff he did for you, and then think if you are willing to do everything that he did for you for him. It's kind of an interesting way to think about it. Any questions? You guys are all experts now, huh?
I think as we read as we've read this chapter, we sit here and we read it in like it was happening today.
Okay.
And the significance of the fact that it happened thousands of years ago.
Right.
And Mordecai and Esther and Hathach could have easily all just been killed for just this conversation they were having.
Right.
So that, it's not only did she go through all these emotions, but any of this could have gotten any of them killed instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And, the other women, could have ratted her out. They could have.
The other concubines and stuff, yeah.
Could have happened.
Yeah.
So her bravery is what kind of shines through in this chapter to me.
Okay.
Because I can't, the women weren't even probably supposed to speak
Right.
that day. So.
But you could see this actually happening today, though, couldn't you? See where you have to have a situation and the courage to speak up, to stand for what you believe in. And I know as a church, we face that right now. Do you stand with the Word of God or do you stand with man? And that's going to be the decision we have to make in the near future. And I know especially with the votes and stuff that are coming down in 2020, it's do you stand with the Bible and God's Word and is it true, or do you stand with man and what they believe? It's going to take some courage to do that. And you're absolutely right. And I think that's why a lot of people, they say, well, the Bible's not relevant. Well, it is. I mean, look at this chapter, all the stuff that happened. This could have easily happened today. Something like this where you'd have to stand up for what you believe in. And you could go through all those emotions like, do I really want to do this? Is this the hill that I'm worth dying on for? And a lot of people are going to say, well, no, I don't want to cause a problem. I don't want to go against the flow. I don't want anybody to think I'm like Mordecai out there dumping ashes on my head to city gates, right? I just want to be me and not cause waves. And at some point, you have to stand for what you believe in one form or another, whether it's talking to family members or what you're doing in the community. We're not just here because we're here. There's a reason for it all. Questions, comments, anything you guys want to throw out there to me? Good, huh? Okay. Well, we are going to go to chapter 5 next week. I believe next week. Let me double check. It's the 12th next week, right? Or the 13th? Yeah.
12.
Okay. Yeah, so we will have it next week at 6. And we'll be doing chapter 5, which is entitled The Heart of the Matter. Would someone like to pray as we leave tonight? Heavenly Father, thank you so much for letting us be in the Bible study of Esther. Thank you for showing us that you're sovereign in all situations, even if we do not recognize it. Just help us to be like Esther and be brave and compassionate and intelligent in the decisions that we make that would affect other people's lives. Help us to be bold in our faith so that we can stand for your Son, Jesus Christ, and share him with everyone that we come across. Lord, we just finally ask that you help us get us all home safely tonight as we leave this Bible study. Lord, it's in your holy name we pray. Amen.